Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you listen to this. Probably at night like me when I'm falling asleep. This is the Corner of Hot Takes in Ontario podcast with Mike Hattery and Gage Will. I'm obviously Mike Hattery. My voice drones a little more. And we're going to talk about a couple of different things today, some spring training topics, maybe some historical Indians topics, developing left-handed pitchers, and other things like that. But first, NCAA tournament's happening right now. If you want tickets and you want to do it without a messy StubHub experience, feel free to check out Minuteman tickets. Right now, Gage is going to drop the Minuteman telephone number where you can have ease of transaction over the phone, someone helping you right now.
Yeah, and they're not just a sports ticket. You can also get concert and theater tickets through Minuteman. So I just recommend checking them out. Give them a call. No fees if you call them, 614-943-3000.
All right. In we go.
Let's roll.
So I think one of the topics that's become the hottest recently is Francisco Mejia, partially because he raked in spring training, partially because he raked all of last year in Akron as a 21-year-old, 2 to 3 years younger than everyone for his level, partially because we really love prospects. But one of the things that's come up is where's he going to play on the big league roster? He's gotten reps at third base in the Arizona Fall League and in the Winter League. They're talking about giving him reps in left field and right field in Columbus and taking balls out there. Where are we at with Francisco Mejia?
And I just want to, with the Mejia thing, the team is selling it straight as a increased versatility function, which the Giants aren't. When the Giants had Buster Posey coming up, they weren't throwing him at third base and in the corner outfield to increase his versatility. I mean, so that's a little bit of an indication right there in itself of where they're at with him behind the plate. But not to get too negative on that side, it's just his bat is so fun, and I just want to see his bat at the major league level. And if they're trying to do that in a different way, then fantastic, because it's common knowledge that his bat's way ahead of his glove. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I just think I really do think it's a reflection of there are significant concerns about his glove. And this is a guy who, as you said, his bat is big league ready. I had conversations with multiple people in the organization last year in AA, and his receiving and blocking skills still just have a lot of work to be done. And when you're at that point, but your bat is big league ready, and the Indians obviously can use some complementary bats in left field right now in the corners, because I think they have Chisenhall, who's averaged like 100 games a year, and they have Brantley, who we're not sure is starting the season with a big league club, and certainly has massive injury flags. So I think it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint. Positional adjustment wise, it's a little tougher, as you mentioned. Like catcher, like I know these are sort of tough. If you look at average weighted runs created, where like 100 is league average, catcher average is 89, which would be pretty easy for Mejia to add surplus value offensively to the catcher position in his first year, or league average production of the catcher position, which with defensive adjustments is like a pretty quick path to a 2-WAR player, which the Indians haven't had at catcher in a couple of years. So I think that's interesting, but the third base thing I don't super buy with him. I also think there's concerns about his body. He's like 5'10", 165. He's really thin. I think there are concerns about whether that guy actually holds up catching 6 to 7 consecutive years. So I think, yeah, go ahead.
So where's the cutoff line, though? So you're talking about moving him to left field, where, if I'm going off memory here, it's one of the toughest where you have to hit if you're playing left field.
So it's like its average, though, is 100. WRC plus last year was 100. So, I mean, it's not as good as it used to be. Left field the last couple of years has been pretty meh. Like, weirdly, shortstop has a pretty high standard now, and first base obviously has a really high standard offensively. And DH.
Reflection of the talent in the league at shortstop mostly. But where's the cutoff line where that big 10 weighted runs created plus gap where you feel comfortable enough throwing a guy who you question defensively behind the plate at the most important position on the field. I'm guessing that's the hardest position to do that in. I mean, obviously, no guessing needed, but
Yeah.
if you think he can maybe be serviceable there and give you 115 weighted runs created plus, like, where you almost want to buy that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I think this might speak to a greater problem, which is I think the Indians have become sort of uncomfortably stubborn about sticking with Gomes and Perez for like the fourth straight year. And I don't think that's a great approach, especially because they're both right-handed catchers and they both suck against right-handed pitching, which, you know, is the fat side of the platoon. One of them's a really good framer and defender, and one of them isn't a super good framer and defender anymore. Like, Gomes is a solid defender, but he's not special, whereas Perez is a special game caller, receiver, blocker, thrower, just overall defender. So I think there's a point at which, like, you have to give up on one of those catchers.
I mean,
and they don't want to do that.
But I've almost wished they would just say, Robo, it's your job. Let's see you perform, because he seems like such a guy that relies so much on timing at the plate. And
isn't that where, like, the positional versatility argument too, like, it sort of breaks down? Is it really wouldn't be that hard to sell me on, oh, like, you go with Perez as the primary guy, and then Mejia gets a bunch of right-handed pitchers, but still only catches like 50 or 60 games behind the plate. Perez gets 100 to 110, which is a pretty fair, you know, shakeout. And then if you're worried about versatility, you can send Mejia out to left field if he's hitting really well, because that's really easy to defend. And you only have him play left field in Cleveland, which is super easy to defend. It's not a versatility thing. They're just like literally looking for another position because they are unwilling to face the reality seemingly right now that, like, carrying Gomes and Perez together is a really weird fit. Like, it's not a good mix of talents because Perez is the wealthy man's Gomes defensively, and they're both pretty bad offensive players.
Yep. But the fool's gold with them is they can be average offensive players almost.
Yeah.
So that's where it makes it. I can almost see where they're coming from with it, because you saw Gomes post 115 weighted runs created plus in 2014. That guy's long gone.
Yeah, he's dead.
But Robo, that stretch in 2015 was phenomenal.
Yeah, he's dead. No, I'm just kidding. Perez is the one that I think if he got consistent playing time, I could kind of buy him being better offensively this year.
The walk rate holds him up almost enough alone as a catcher, right?
That literally he just has to run into like 5 more hard hit balls a season, and his profile makes a ton more sense. Like, I think it's pretty narrow, but it's not super optimistic that happens. I mean, we're talking about the last 2 years, Gomes ran an 87 WRC plus and 32. 87 is close to average for catcher. Last year, the far better defender Perez ran a 75 after running a 57. On the other hand, Perez in his first 2 years runs like a 90 and a 107, which means, like, you know, maybe there's some meat on the bone, but they're like, the sample to be optimistic about him, and projection systems like him more than he's been the last 2 years. I just don't know. He just doesn't hit the ball hard enough frequently enough, because I think he takes a ton of pitches. I think he's someone else where, like, there's that passivity factor where it's like great because it spikes a walk rate, and he doesn't have a ton of swing and miss, but he just doesn't hit enough pitches in the strike zone.
He's also one of those people you can so tell when he's locked in, because he sprays the ball.
Yeah.
And then he'll go through a month stretch where he can't even hit anything other than a weak dribbler to shortstop. With the catchers, it's just such a living on the borderline mediocre, and they give you so plus defense. So I can see, like I said, where the fool's gold lies with them, but there's just the ceiling is very limited.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd like to. I I really like Jan Gomes as a person, and like watching him in 2015 and 2016 was really heartbreaking. But there was a point at which, to me, like Gomes doesn't make a ton of sense anymore. Um, and I think there's an extent to which if they could have just moved him to offset salary, I think they would have, or for a flyer relief arm.
This offseason made it really tough because his salary looked 10 times worse.
Yeah.
Wellington Castillo less.
But boy, Wellington, I will defend him because A, he is one of the 5 best names in baseball, and B, he's like weirdly underrated. And also, I think something happened with Gomes where like the framing era, like he was one of the better framers when it was on like the front end of the framing area. Now we've reached this point where like teams develop framing pretty well, and he's become sort of like a bottom of the league guy over the last 3 or 4 years because he just had sort of like average skills, and there's like age degradation. I'm picking on Gomes too much. I think searching for another way to get Mejia in the lineup when like catcher is just not a great position for you is kind of weird. I understand left field if you're worried about Brantley, and if it speaks to like Brantley concern, that's another matter, and like we can talk about getting him in the lineup in left field. But it's weird to have this conversation because they have 2 catchers who are certainly big league catchers, and I think they're both like starters on the caliber of like 21 to 30, but they're not anything to like block your best prospects since Lindor with.
Right. Let's move on. I can't harp on the Gomes thing anymore. It's almost becoming a Brantley thing for me where we've just talked about it too much.
Okay.
The lefty start. We got a question on Twitter about lefty starters with the Indians because there have been a significant lack thereof for the better part of our lifetimes.
Yeah.
I can't. I mean, you talk about TJ House as being one of the biggest names as far as a lefty starter. And it was an interesting question because I'm going back through and trying to think of the other guys. And I mean, can you recall a few other lefties that have graced the Indians with their presence in the last 20 years?
It's basically just Lee and Sabathia, right? Everyone else is slop. like we had a couple of years of sloppy Jeremy Sowers. We had a couple of years of sloppy Aaron Laffey.
Oh, Laffey. I forgot that name.
But I think other than that, I think it's something that they haven't had a lot of. Partially, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's a core competency issue in terms of development. I mean, I think they took a flyer on Brady Aiken, and Brady Aiken now throws the ball 5 miles per hour less than he used to because he has major arm health issues. But other than that, it's not like they've drafted a bunch of these weird pitchability lefties who like actually haven't had pitchability. Like Sean Brady was a fairly high pick. Moramondo wasn't a high pick, but he's never going to start in the big leagues. If he does, it's a big problem. Merritt, maybe. Nah.
They seem to really like the guy they got from St. Louis for Brandon Moss, Rob Kaminsky, too, but he's just never really taken that next step.
Yeah. I mean, he hasn't figured out. I mean, he's had issues like with his curveball, which was once his best offering. He's had issues using it, and I don't think there's anything in the pipeline coming lefty-wise that's particularly exciting.
No, and I'm kind of the mindset I don't really care. Just give me good pitchers. I don't care if they throw left, right, or whatever.
Yeah, I don't either.
I mean, there's a couple guys that might profile as there's the one guy in Columbus last year who had a little bit better year than I thought, and he was kind of a mid-round pick. I think what's his name, Matt Whitehouse.
Yeah, meh.
And, like his ceiling is loogie. Like that's the absolute best serviceable loogie. Maybe I don't know.
This is why when somebody does an organizational prospect ranking of the top 10 left-handed starters, you probably shouldn't read it because number 1 on the list should be a loogie. Just throwing that out there. Makes me a bad person, but
You can
don't
find
read
those
those
guys.
lists.
Like even those, that's not something you need to really build that much in the minors.
Yeah, it's just not a. If although I will say that like the Indians, I think one of the bigger things that they've really struggled with is like actually developing good relievers. They have Cody Allen who flies to the big leagues, but like everybody who's been on their contention level like teams, like McAllister, they got when he was a starter in like AAA in the big leagues, and he's like the worst of the bunch. Miller they dealt for. Allen's the only one, like he's the outlier, and he was big league ready within like a year. He flew through the minors. It wasn't like a development success story. It was here's a post like Tommy John surgery guy who we got like later than he should have been drafted because of injury risk, and he flew through the minors once he was healthy. So, Shaw too is someone they dealt for, and like Joe Smith, I guess a long time ago they had a developmental role with. But like they just haven't developed a good reliever, and when you have like 40 picks, and at this point you just need like somebody who can throw 96 with league average command and a decent secondary offering to be a relief pitcher, it's like kind of embarrassing.
I missed Ben Heller.
Yeah, he was interesting. So was J.P. Fierson, or however the hell you pronounce his name. I guess I will comment that like some people are high on Sam Hentges, who's like missed a couple minor league. He's had some injury problems. He was like drafted as a prep guy. He's still fairly young. Can run the fastball up as a lefty, but he hasn't really pitched above A ball. So I guess he's like quasi interesting. But
what about the guy they had in Aaron? He was in Akron last year, wasn't he? Aaron Savale.
Yeah, he's a righty, but
right. But we're talking about developing relievers, and I just noticed a few people higher on him than I don't really know much about him, but I've seen a few people high on him.
I guess if you think he can like run his fastball up like 94, 95 if he's in the pen, then he's interesting. He has a pretty dope slider, so I mean, I don't know. He gets a bunch of ground balls.
This year might be the first year of the last few that it presents an issue too, because they've been so good at finding like your Shaw and Otero, and there's just now we could have a major depth issue in that pen because I'm not sure I trust Nick Goody, and he's borderline for me. He could go either way.
Yeah, I really go back and forth on Goody. Like he's someone who has like a really deceptive release point, and I think it plays up his like velocity and secondary offerings. But I also just wonder when guys like have deceptive release points, I wonder if like third or fourth time you see them as a hitter, like if you start to like pick different like release point spots or different rules with them. I don't know. He's someone that and the other thing is I don't know. I don't super buy him. He gives up too much hard contact too.
Yeah, and I mean that he got a lot of whiffs the last couple of years, and maybe that's something that he was a 15% whiff guy over the last 3 years, pretty much, and maybe 2 years, but that's only on 80-some innings, and I just don't know how sustainable that is. To your point with your deceptive release point guys, and maybe starting to pick up things from a hitter standpoint. So there's just only about 80 innings on Nick Goody's book, so that's hard to really buy into anything there for me.
Yeah, I think one of the like quasi exciting things to me was I was like, oh, Julian Merriweather, I think, is like the first time where we could see like a really interesting, if they transition to him to the bullpen, like a pretty interesting bullpen piece for the Indians and, moving forward. And he has Tommy John. Anderson was the other one. Like, can they convert him into like an impact bullpen piece? And he's on the 60-day DL, and his like shift back has taken more time from Tommy John than I think people expected. So, like two pieces that were like potentially exciting to see. Hey, can these guys maybe have a small impact in 2018? To to make us think they can have a long-term, like 3 or 4 year bullpen run with the Indians from 2019 to 2021. I think like there's not a ton of optimism that we're going to see that this year. Maybe with Anderson from midseason on, but I'm not super optimistic.
Yeah, where were you at on Cody? I haven't seen much reported on him.
I haven't either. So when not much is reported, it's always a place to be really positive. Because like at the start of spring training, when pitchers and catchers reported, everybody's like, "Oh, Cody's throwing his first bullpen in a while." Everybody's amped up, and then he's moved to the 60-day DL, and we haven't heard a peep out of him. So
take his time. No need to rush back from that, but
yeah, not great. Not great. So I guess the one other like big thing I wanted to touch on that we can give a chunk of time to is like spring training player priority in terms of like who's getting plate appearances, how does that impact races in terms of like who's going to come out on the roster, and also who's getting sent to the minors, who's not, for guys who are on the 40-man and like on the bubble of making the team. So, like, do you have any takeaways so far in terms of, like, spring training priority?
Man, they just do not want to give Yandy the time of day. Rob Refsnyder is doubling your plate appearances, and Richie Schaefer and Eric Stamets are getting more as well. I mean, like, you love Stamets, which is fine. I mean, he's an interesting guy, but isn't Yandy like the higher priority guy on this roster? Rob Refsnyder, who they got from Toronto, was it? There's just some affinity. There's some. I don't know what it is, but Yandy has like 17 plate appearances.
Yeah, I think the like utility man distribution of plate appearances has been the most fascinating. Like, Eric Gonzalez has 10 less than Rob Refsnyder, and Urshela has like 5 to 7 more than Gonzalez, and Stamets still hasn't been like sent down to the minors and is getting like has gotten basically as many as Eric Gonzalez has. So it's like sort of quasi interesting to see that distribution to me. The other one I think that's been a really huge gap that's kind of noticeable is Rajai Davis and Melvin Upton. I mean, Upton has like 10 more plate appearances, 8 to 10 more plate appearances. I think that's like sort of fascinating. I don't know. Greg Allen not being sent down with the last wave with the Mejia Bobby Bradley wave was pretty fascinating to me as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think you and I had said he had basically like a 0 to 2% chance to start the year with the team. I've obviously been really like, I think he's going to get a pretty good chunk of games in Cleveland this year, but I wasn't optimistic he would break with the team. And I think that is increasingly becoming more of a possibility. I'd move it to like,
Rajai Davis or, BJ Upton in that case, or Melvin Upton in that case, right?
And are we both fine with doing that to Rajai?
Rajai, yeah. I'd rather keep Upton, but I'm fine with departing with either one of them, to be honest. I think Upton provides a lot more value to this roster.
I do too. He has a ton of power, and I mean, on the other hand, like he's struck out a crap ton in 33. He's struck out 33% of the time in his spring plate appearances, which is like, I guess, the story of Melvin Upton, but it's definitely something you don't love to see.
Right. And I mean, that's always been his knock, but I think if you kind of feature him in like, and I think for all the things we can knock Francona for, one of the things he did well last year was meet out Austin Jackson's playing time to make him as effective as possible.
Yeah. And I think I always want to view, like, if you're doing the fourth or fifth if you're doing the fourth outfielder role with this team, where once again, like Brantley, Chisenhall, Zimmer, all really struggle against left-handed pitching, your basic decision is like who has the best upside against left-handed pitching, And I could foresee actually hitting Melvin Upton like 6th or 7th occasionally against left-handed pitching. And if Rajai Davis hits higher than 9th against left-handed pitching, I'm going to be super pissed. And I don't think there's any defensive gap except Upton might be a little better in center. So to me, it's like pretty easy to just say goodbye, Rajai Davis.
But I'm going to play devil's advocate here for a second, because is there anything Davis can give you, I mean, on the base paths that can make it interesting?
They have, like, generally for their career, like, similar efficiency ratings, don't they?
Efficiency, like on the base paths?
Yeah, still on base efficiency.
Yeah, probably. I would say, without looking, that Davis probably, the volume is much more on the Davis end, right?
I don't know. Let me double check.
He was stealing a lot at the beginning of his career. I don't know how much he did in like Toronto a couple years ago, and
I'm fascinated by this question, but offer other criticisms while I like compare this.
Davis just doesn't do a whole lot for me. I loved him in 2016. I thought, like with Austin Jackson in 17, I thought Francona handled his playing time well for the most part. But I mean, Upton's been an effective major leaguer, like a serviceable major leaguer the past couple of years. In San Diego a couple of years ago, I mean, he got too many at bats in 2016 and didn't really play in 2017. But
so like Davis has 394 career steals. Excuse me. Upton has 300 career steals. Davis has been caught 6 more times, 8 more times, but he's stolen more bags. I mean, I think he's slightly more efficient. Although, like, Upton's last year in San Diego, he stole 27 bases on 35 attempts, which is pretty efficient.
Man, he did. I thought he was more effective towards the beginning of his career, but
so I mean, I think there's probably a speed advantage there, but I think it's like sort of at the margins. And I also just think there is actually a defensive gap between the two when Upton's healthy. I mean, I hate what. Like, Rajai Davis should be a way better center fielder than he is. He has way too much glide speed to be the quality of center fielder he is, but that's just sort of reality, I guess. Anyway, so I'm pro a Greg Allen 5th outfielder role. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they keep Upton and Davis early, but I really don't know. I mean, if Brantley's I also feel like you have to find a spot. I'm really getting higher and higher on Tyler Naquin. He's made some like hand and swing adjustment placement changes. I just am like, we got way too low on Tyler Naquin. He's a good fourth outfielder.
I'm gonna say it. I'm gonna say it on here. I think his 2018 ceiling is higher than Michael Brantley's at this point. Crush me, kill me.
I don't think it's a bad take for the following reasons. Like, we crush Naquin for 2 reasons. One of them is, like, for a month and a half, he couldn't hit a high fastball. So we all gave up on him and had to watch him in the playoffs when he super sucked. And I think that, like, the playoffs left 2 really bad tastes in our mouths defensively. And the reality is, if Michael Brantley was playing center, I think we would have also had a bad taste in our mouths because he doesn't defend center particularly well. I think Naquin's a better defender potentially in left field than Brantley, probably by a solid margin. He's more athletic. He's got a hose. And I think if you move him to left field, he's way more interesting defensively. And offensively, when he's hitting right-handed pitching, he kind of crushes right-handed pitching. It's just like we have a really strong track record.
And I mean, that mild to hot take kind of gets back to what we think Brantley is now. And part of the reason we've harped on that so much is last year he couldn't drive the ball the way he did the couple years before. He hit the ball well, and he was an above average hitter, but it was a lot of singles. And I think he went through a couple stretches where he hit a couple homers in a couple weeks, and then it just would go. I thought I recalled something where he kind of had a burst of power for a week or two, but then it kind of dissolved again. But Naquin, I think, like you said, we got way too far down on it. I was guilty of it. Then in 2017, I don't know if there was a whole lot of reason to play him, but this year, I just don't see many better ceiling plays. Like Zimmer's ceiling is obviously higher, but outside of that, you think Lonnie Chisenhall's got a higher ceiling than Naquin? I don't.
No. I mean, some people really buy into the launch angle stuff with Chisenhall, and that's fine. I mean, I think it's an interesting adjustment, and I'm like sort of excited that he's made the adjustment, but I just never
even cap him at. Like,
he's never been a 2-WAR player.
With that, like, if you buy into that, is he a 2.5 WAR player?
I mean, maybe, but like, he's never posted 2-WAR in his entire career on Fangraph F-WAR, and he's 30, and I'm supposed to just like buy into this when I've seen a fly ball spike in like 80 games or 100 games, and I just sort of just not going to sell myself out for that yet. If he does it, fine. I'm good with it.
He's going to get his chance.
Yeah. All right. Anything left? Anything left on the bone here?
I'm just let me talk about Rob Refsnyder's plate appearances just for just a second.
I'm good with that.
This guy has his career has, let's see here, 126 games. You know how many WAR he's been working those 126 games?
I'm guessing like -2.
Negative 0.8.
Oh, damn.
He's been Michael Martinez in the in the 80% of a season he's played. So that's where the love's coming from, I guess. It's just comical that he's getting this display.
So the quasi funny thing is like projection systems actually like him to be a kind of useful util guy. Like that's something I find kind of funny.
Zips has him with 100 and some games, being almost a 1 WAR player.
Like yeah, like Zips finds him kind of interesting. He can kind of defend third, kind of defend second, kind of defend right, defend center pretty okay. I don't know. He has like really great minor league really pretty solid minor league production. And I guess like the question is like, do we have enough big league sample to say the minor league production is a mirage or is it not a mirage? I don't know.
I mean, he's only got 300 and some change plate appearances, so I'm not going to dog on him too much at the big league level because I'm not going to dog on him too much because he's solid. Like you said, the minor league production is outstanding, but there's got like the Yankees bailed on him after 74 plate appearances.
Yeah. I mean, I the only thing that has me quasi interested is like I said, like he in like some innings he graded out well in center in his big league career, and his minor league numbers don't super suck, which is just not the case for like some of the other util guys the Indians are considering.
No, and I'll give you that. It's not like
but he can't play short, so that's a big deal.
Not like really Gio or Egon really move the needle that much for me where that's going to be an issue, but the Yandy thing, like you said, he can play short, so maybe that's where they like him more. I guess I would rather have Yandy and J-Ram playing short a couple times throughout the Yandy on the roster and J-Ram playing short a couple times throughout the year.
Me too.
Then it's a tough one. You can almost see a little bit where they're going with Refsnyder, but there's a reason the Yankees and Blue Jays both didn't think he was worth retaining his services.
Yeah, I think Gage and I are willing to hard pass on Rob Refsnyder. But to be honest, I'm willing to hard pass on Eric Gonzalez and Giovanni Urshela, so that doesn't say a whole lot. like we've talked about, the only like utility guy I'm quasi interested in is Eric Stamets, because I think he's made some launch angle adjustments, and I think if you have a utility guy who can run into like 12 dongs, make decent contact frequency, and play elite defense, which Stamets is like graded as an exceptional defender at shortstop, which is just like Gonzalez is average to maybe above. Gio's never played there really. I think that to me makes a ton of sense.
Wouldn't it be fun to have Francona fall in love with a utility player that has a ceiling?
Yeah, like an actual bat.
Like not a Mike Avilas, Gio Urshela, Michael Martinez, guys that cap out in their best. Like this is even being generous to a couple as an average major league player. But that's why like you said, the Stamets plate appearance thing is really fun because that would be a utility guy with a ceiling, and we're not going to see him on the opening day roster. But maybe in a few months, if something's not working there, I'm not selling hopes on that because I just want a utility guy with a ceiling because I feel like that's where you can kind of experiment a little bit.
Yeah, me too, man. I want a ceiling. I just like the thing is Gonzalez. I don't know. Stamets is at least
Gonzalez's ceiling, and I think we touched on this a couple weeks ago. But
I just think Stamets is young enough. I mean, he's 26, but in his age 25 season in AA and AAA, mainly AAA, like there's significant reason to believe he made like major adjustments to his offensive profile, and like to be a utility player and be valuable and play short, second, and third, you really just need to run like a 90 WRC plus. And like I just have more optimism that Stamets can do that than either Egon or Urshela. And I know projection systems don't love Stamets, but projection systems don't like players who like had like a massive production spike in the last season, because their like aim is to like sort of like be conservative and like regress off the 5 years of other track record, which is good. Like that's an important value of projection systems, to not overreact. But one of the difficulties we have with the fly ball revolution is you have all these guys making like a fairly major adjustment, and maybe it doesn't stick, but if it does, he's like, to me, has a way better chance of being a good major league or an average to below average major league hitter than a garbage one like Urshela and Gonzalez.
100%. Yep.
All right, that's about it. That's all we got this week. Gage and I are trying to keep it a little shorter so it's easier to digest. I'm not sure we actually succeeded. I think that was close to 35, 40 minutes. But if you have any questions, send them to either of our Twitter accounts or the Twitter account for the podcast, Corner of Hot Takes in Ontario. We love to have different things to talk about on air and questions to respond to. So please send those our way. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again soon.